Good evening, everybody. Welcome
Woohoo!
back to Hoops HD. This is our Under the Radar podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by John Stalika, David Griggs, and joining us again from Bracketeer.org and fresh from a not under the radar game down in Gainesville, Rocco Miller. First of all, Rocco, how about that game tonight? They just
Wow.
went to.
Yeah, it was a wild finish. Ole Miss came with a great game plan, took Florida out of the game. Florida hits a crazy NBA range 3-point shot. Debatable if Ole Miss should have fouled. Sends the game to OT, and Florida took over in overtime and escaped with a home win. Good game.
But given that this is our Under the Radar podcast, David, we don't care, right?
Yeah,
No, we don't. No, we don't care. I remember when Rocco was at the Michigan-North Carolina game and we cut him off. We thought he was going to an under-the-radar game.
But this is under the radar. And John, let me start with you. Can you tell anybody that's new to the show what it means to be under the radar?
Don't be fooled by other people who would say that a team like Rutgers is going to be under the radar. Granted, they did have a nice win tonight. But under the radar, we have two basic rules on this program. Number one, you cannot be a member of either the Power 5 conferences or regular multi-bid leagues like the Big East, the American, the Atlantic 10, Mountain West, or the West Coast Conference. And rule number two, sorry, Buffalo, you cannot be a member in the top 25 right now, which means you are on our collective radars.
Yeah, if Buffalo works at it, they might get back under the radar, but they're really going to have to work at it.
Yeah, they're going to have to lose a few more games to get there. So hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully, if we want to discuss them a little more, they can do that. But David, I think you had one other thing you wanted to discuss before we got going here.
Yes, this is something that, I mean, it's been up all year, but we've updated. I think we've had one update, and it's starting to impact the under the radar conferences. This is our NCAA tournament survival board, and this is a great tool for the selection committee, so they can come here and see what they're supposed to be doing. There's 4 categories. There's the locks and automatics. That's a team that obviously wins an automatic bid by winning the conference tournament. There are locks. They're in bold. We don't have any teams in bold because we don't feel that there's a single team, not even Tennessee, that would make the NCAA tournament if they all lost all their remaining games. Italics, that's what most of the teams in that means they're under consideration. And then as you get down into some of these under-the-radar conferences, you see teams in regular print. Already, we feel if those teams win out to the championship game and lose the championship game, that they will not even be considered for the conference tournament. You see there, the Ivy League, it's got – well, we're still considering all the Ivy League, at least the last time we updated this, but the MEAC
Been a few weeks since we updated.
might get considered. Ohio Valley, kind of a hybrid there. You see the teams that are being considered and not. Sunbelt, SWAC. And then kind of here, as we get to the Summit League, you see some teams being considered, some not. And how about this? George Mason, strength and conditioning coach, Andy Durahan, still being under consideration if he can win out to the Summit League championship.
Wow! So if he wins every game that he plays until now the Summit League championship game,
yes,
he may make the
NCAA tournament.
Wow, that's great for Handy.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't have gone to you even.
Oh, you had to know it was coming when I told you I wanted to go over the survival board.
David, you know what? I've got one thing I got to say to you tonight, actually, and it's right here. Are you stepping to me right now?
Yes,
are you?
Yes, yes, Sanford. Oh, the greatest moment.
Outstanding, Chad.
If only Sanford was on top of the Sunshine. Oh, God.
On that note, why don't we just start out with that Samford team? We like to do a feature conference every week, and I think we featured them once earlier this year, but why not? Let's do it again. It's such a great conference, the Southern Conference, with the Scott Padgett and the Samford Bulldogs, and nothing else, right, Rocco? That the conference?
Well, I think just the last week or so, maybe the last 3 games, Samford actually picked it up. They got robbed from maybe the upset of the year with Wofford's buzzer beater. In overtime. Stanford, I think, had that game won in regulation as well. Wofford twice got a get-out-of-jail-free card with some clutch shots.
Clutch shots, and if you watch the end of that, Rocco, didn't you think that sort of – I mean, they sort of gotten a little hometown no calls on some of those fouls, or no foul.
They sure did. And then how about the resiliency of this Samford club to only 2 days later go to Furman and win by 2? So – Samford clearly starting to play some of their best basketball of the year now, and maybe a threat in the SoCon tournament.
Right, but I think we really got to start with the top of the SoCon, David, and maybe now Furman kind of started to fall off a little bit, but at least these top two teams. And the big question we have to ask for the SoCon, maybe more than any other conference out there, is in the under the radars is there a legitimate shot for two bids no matter who wins the conference tournament here? With Wofford,
I don't know about no matter who. I think if it's any, I think Wofford can get inside the bubble, and if someone other than them wins it, they could get two in. I see you got Wofford up here, and this is where you kind of have to peel back the onion a little bit. Mm-hmm. On the surface, just one top 50 win. Well, they're the only team that's won at Greensboro, so that win looks better than. Even though Greensboro might not be on the board or inside the bubble, that's still a really good win. They have a win at South Carolina. They have and if you look at point margin here against East Tennessee State, they've been winning convincingly. Now they've had to sweat out the Furman and the Samford game that Rocco just mentioned. So it isn't that they've blown everybody out, but here's the thing: when you look at their overall record and you look at their 4 losses. I know that you have to evaluate what's there. You can't really suppose, but we can suppose on this show. Say they had played teams from the American or the Mountain West or the Atlantic 10, and they win 3 out of the 4 of those, which they probably would have because they've beaten teams of that caliber anyway. They'd have 1 loss, and I think they would be getting talked about the same way Buffalo is right now. But
you're not going to see it on the page right here, but you could also look at those 4 losses for Wofford. They're kind of what
they're right there on the page, John. They're right.
Let me finish. Those are 1A. Those are 1A losses. A team like UNC Greensboro would be considered a 1B win now because there's actually 2 subsets of Tier 1 and Tier 2 games that the committee will look at.
Well, John, let me stick with you. I've got Greensboro up on the right side there. Isn't that a very similar profile? I mean, they don't have those 2 Tier 2 wins, but they've got in the Quadrant 3 a lot more going on there. Isn't there a case to be made that Greensboro should be in the at-large bid discussion?
Greensboro has a lot of Tier 3 and Tier 4 wins, whereas they only have 1 that's in the top 2 tiers. Now, granted, they will have their chances when they go to places like Wofford and Furman and get a shot at revenge against East Tennessee State, but they're going to have to hit
revenge. It would be a sweep against East Tennessee State they're going for.
They're going to have to still hit a couple bullseyes, though, because they don't have the non-conference wins that Wofford or certainly a team like Furman would, but unfortunately Furman has fallen down a bit.
Right. Well, Rocco, I know that you think you had Greensboro as your last team in as an at-large in a second SoCon this week, which I had as well. What about that?
Yeah, and I think that really comes from a place of they have nothing bad on the resume. They've got a proven road win at East Tennessee State that you have to respect. They've got a total of 8 true road wins. So if you're comparing them to teams like Temple and Pittsburgh and UCF and Creighton and Butler and Arizona and whoever else you have on your bubble, nobody's coming close to that amount of road wins. It really is kind of a right here, right now decision that I have them in. I think as time evolves, the teams in the power conferences will certainly have plenty of chances to surpass where Greensboro is, but I think as long as Greensboro doesn't lose another game, which is a big if, they're going to stay in this conversation and deservedly so.
And I honestly, Rocco, all those teams that you listed off, I think Greensboro beats all of them on equal terms if they were to play on a neutral court. I mean, some of those teams just aren't good.
And Greensboro is a veteran team that gave Gonzaga all they could handle last year, and they've proven themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Dave, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this East Tennessee State team. We've already mentioned Furman a little bit, but ETSU, a dangerous team and quietly dangerous in the SoCon almost.
Yeah, they are. I don't think they've taken down any of the heavyweights yet. Like, Wofford has not lost, and the only team that's beaten Greensboro is Wofford. But they've beaten everybody else, haven't they?
Pretty much. Just the 2 conference losses.
Yeah.
But let's take a quick look at the upcoming schedule for this week. A lot of games come up here Thursday night, tomorrow night, include that ETSU with a tough road test against Scott Padgett and the Are You Stepping to Me Right Now team. Beyond that, Wofford has a battle on Saturday, actually about tomorrow night at Mercer and at Citadel on Saturday. A Citadel team that's been surprisingly good this year as well, at least by Citadel standards.
Very good.
Conference.
Yeah, and you mentioned Wofford. This is a really young Wofford team. They spent some time in the rankings, and deservedly so, and they had the most notable win against Villanova, and that's really helped the league. But I just don't think they're up there yet. But as a program, wow, I mean, they are really going in the right direction, even though they struggle in conference play. But we had all of us said, even after some of the big wins against Villanova, that they were going to struggle in SoCon play. So it's not that surprising.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we go back and run through the rest of the conferences here. We're going to start things off in the America East, where we saw what we thought, Rocco, was going to be the game of the season in the America East. It ended up being the blowout of the season on Saturday when Vermont went to Stony Brook.
Yes, Vermont bounced back from a tough loss at home in the revenge game against UMBC, which turned not to be revenge at all. It turned out to be a game without Anthony Lamb, and UMBC played really well in that game. They lost by 13, but they bounced back and demolished Stony Brook on the road to really regain control of the league. And so a nice performance by Vermont. But I also think, that UMBC team is the story of the league right now.
Oh.
I see tonight that they also were able to beat Stony Brook.
Yeah.
So clearly not just taking advantage of a shorthanded Vermont team last week. They're playing much better basketball the last few weeks. It looks like they've won now. Certainly the last three. They won
the last 5. They're really rolling.
Or 5, yeah, you're right, 5. So UMBC will be a threat again, it appears, if they continue on this trend.
Right. UMBC and Stony Brook obviously heading in the wrong direction at the wrong time here, especially if you got to remember here, David, that this conference does go to campus sites for the conference tournament, and Stony Brook could end up in the 3rd or 4th seed and having to play 2 road games in the conference tournament, not just one.
Stony Brook's in more of a rut than what it appears. I mean, it isn't just the loss tonight and the blowout loss Saturday. Their previous 2 games, while they won, they were wins against really, really weak competition like Maine and Albany, 2 of the weaker teams in the nation, not just the league. And for them to have to sweat those out, so maybe we should have seen this coming more than we did, but I think I was so excited to see them play Vermont that I didn't see it coming. And now they've lost 2 in a row. And are they in a tailspin?
I think they're definitely in a tailspin. They've got to host Hartford coming up on Saturday, and then they go to Binghamton. Saturday, Vermont is at Lowell, then hosting Maine. Maine picked up another win tonight, I believe. Didn't they? They knocked off
they blew out UMass Lowell, which was pretty surprising. Yeah.
And somewhere in our archives, we have Zach going on about Maine for about 20 minutes. It was incredible.
So we just talk a lot of Maine basketball. Let me bring you in here and move over to the next conference, the Atlantic Sun, which featured another game of the week, or game of the season even, when we had just last night, Tuesday night, Lipscomb going to Liberty, and again, thought it would be a great game, and it wasn't.
Well, it's a great game if you're a Lipscomb fan, because they're starting to look like a team that could possibly finish above the bubble, assuming things were to break right, and you possibly split the next 2 games against Liberty, depending on how things play out. But you can't be losing to anyone else in this conference to really have a decent shot.
Yeah. There's the profile, and one of the things 2 things I want to point out here: the road wins at TCU and Liberty. They only have 1 home loss, each of those teams, and it's to Lipscomb. They've beaten everybody else. The SMU lost some of its glitter. Vermont, who we just got done talking about,
blew out Vermont.
They blew out Vermont. And look, okay, that's one thing. The second thing I want to point out is their losses. The 2 to Belmont were by 4 points and 2 points. The loss at Louisville by 4 points is closer than any other margin at home, other than the game they lost to Kentucky and the game against Michigan State, which went into overtime. Louisville is a protected seed. They have performed better at Louisville than anybody who isn't a protected seed has. The third thing I want to point out is the margin of victories in some of these games. This Lipscomb team is not just winning, but they're not even sweating a lot of the teams that they're playing. And I know that there's a lot of quad 4 on there, but for the most part, they've been blowing people's doors off.
Well, and that's why, David, I just pulled up as a comparison the Wofford team we just discussed as being at the top of the SoCon. Rocco, very similar profiles, isn't it, Lipscomb and Wofford?
I think they are very similar. I think the Wofford losses are a little bit sexier, to say the least, because their only home loss is North Carolina, and the other three are tournament teams on the road, clear tournament teams on the road. Whereas Lipscomb lost twice to Belmont, a Belmont team that is increasingly growing a much better profile themselves. However, they're not a team in the field. Clemson also not a team in the field. I know that's still a very tough place to get a win. But everything else Lipscomb's done on the left-hand side has been nothing but impressive. And I think their biggest statement was last night. One thing that I had a beef with, I've been trying to avoid all the net arguments. There's been enough banter about that across the college basketball circles. But I did have a problem this morning when I saw, Lipscomb blows Liberty out on the road. They go up, I think, 3 or 4 spots to the mid-30s. But they destroyed Liberty's ranking. They took Liberty from a 46 down to 58 with one loss. And it's just too bad that a big clash like that results in one team looking weaker and the winning team not really benefiting that much.
Well, and that's what I'm seeing more and more on these net rankings, that margin of victory seems to be almost too heavy of a factor. And it's factored in twice. It's factored in with the offensive and defensive efficiencies. Right. And it's refactored in because there is a margin of victory component on top of that. So there's a double factor in margin of victory.
Right.
And I think that a win is a win and a loss is a loss.
Exactly.
That's always been my view of things, at least. And sure, you shouldn't be, a 1-point loss is a lot better than a 30-point loss, but you still lost the game at the end of the day.
And what's scary is you have the 10-point cap, so it doesn't even reflect that Lipscomb actually
in
won
one of the categories.
In the straight scoring margin, the 10-point cap is there, but in the offensive and defensive efficiency, there is no cap. So a bigger blowout will help your net ranking a little bit.
Yeah, and in fact, Nate Oates over at Buffalo is encouraging them to blow teams out at the end, and I can't really blame him because he understands the formula.
Yeah,
he's gone on record publicly to say that they're doing that.
I can't blame him. It's tough for me to blame him for doing that. Quickly look at the upcoming schedule in the ASUN. We've got Lipscomb is hosting North Alabama and then at North Florida, while Liberty is hosting NJIT and Stetson the next 2 games. But David, let me bring you back in here. Roll over to the Big Sky Conference, where here comes the standings right here, and 3 teams there with 2 losses in them.
Yeah, Northern Colorado, I was really big on them in November and December. In November, didn't like them so much in December, and now at the end of January, I'm really starting to like them again. And those are your front-range champs. So, looking to get a second banner even out of this. So, but a 3-way tie, I still think I know that they're coming off of kind of a rough week, but I still like this Weber State team.
Weber State did lose the game to Montana in the big game on Saturday, though, David. You like
it? They did. Montana? It was at Montana.
Right.
Yeah. But and they do play again, right? I mean, I still, despite them losing at Montana, I still think that they're ultimately going to end up on top. But
and they could play a third time in the Big Sky Championship game, which will determine who gets the automatic win.
Right? Yeah. And I predict the winner of that game is going to win the conference.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, there's no bubble talk at all in this conference, but the upcoming schedule here, Rocco, Weber is hosting Portland State, and I think that's the only game they've got this week, while Montana has the big cross-state rivalry at Montana State.
Yeah, since it's at Montana State, I'd say it's almost a throw the record out the window situation, which we've seen in previous years. I know Montana State's not a very strong team, but they'll get a rowdy gym for that game, so that'll be a fun one to watch. Outside of that, I agree with you guys. I actually think this thing's up for grabs. Teams like Eastern Washington and Portland State have come out of nowhere to win a few games. So who knows what's going to happen when they get to Boise.
Next conference, originally, as of this morning, this was going to be our feature conference for the day, but until I opened my mail and got my T-shirt. So I had to switch it up to the Scott Padgett's team. But the Big South Conference, John, let me in here. We actually saw a crazy game tonight with Radford, the conference leaders still, but they had the 7-point lead with 25 seconds left against Campbell, and gave up 8 points in those last 25 seconds and lost the game on a Chris Clemens 3 at the buzzer. I don't know if you caught any of that game, but Radford did suffer their first conference loss tonight.
Their first conference loss, but by the same token, they still have a full game lead over Winthrop. And in a conference like this, they'll still be in fairly decent shape as far as having the top seed and still getting to host on campus sites, at least through the championship game. I mean, Radford was not a team that was really going to have at-large hopes, even with the win against Notre Dame back in November, but certainly a bit of a setback for tonight.
Right. And David, the other big news in this conference was UNC Asheville tonight hosting South Carolina Upstate, picking up their first D1 win of the season. And I want to pull their profile up against one other team here and ask you a question. Who is the worst team in Division I right now, given that every D1 team has at least one D1 win? And there's Asheville on the left, and how about the New Hampshire Wildcats on the right?
Yeah, the one thing is they just don't have enough sub-300 losses. I don't think New Hampshire does, whereas Asheville has 3 or 4.
Okay, that's a fair argument. But Rocco, we got a close battle here, don't we?
It is a close battle. It is a close battle. I think Asheville, that would have been a great story. They still could do it.
They because they have looked so bad in so many games this year. But they did get – this was their most winnable game of the entire season, hosting Upstate. Upcoming schedule, though. John, what do you think of the upcoming schedule here? Let's put it on the screen.
Well, Radford and Winthrop on Saturday is still going to be a pretty considerable matchup, but Hampton and High Point. Hampton also had a nice win tonight, and we're also talking about a possible semifinalist that could be matched up with Radford come tournament time. So there are going to be some implications for the Hampton High Point game as well.
Let's keep rolling along here to the Big West Conference. Rocco, you've been a West Coast guy, even though you're in the Southeast tonight. How about how things are going in the West Coast? Irvine and Santa Barbara still winning.
Yeah, well, Santa Barbara took a surprising loss last week. I believe they lost to Fullerton, and Fullerton had themselves a heck of a week to kind of get themselves back in the race. They took out UCSB and then got a road win at Cal Poly, which I assume everybody will do this year, but still took care of business. So great week for Fullerton. I believe we have the big matchup this week. Sorry to jump the gun, but it's Irvine versus Santa Barbara, two very quality teams.
Tomorrow night, yep.
Definitely the two favorites still. But Fullerton's showing strength. Hawaii and Irvine had a game last week that went to overtime that Irvine won by 1. So we know that Hawaii's tough one, especially at home. And then Northridge continues to compete. So, Mark Godfrey has that team improving game after game. So we'll see where they're at come March. This is a fun league.
Right. And it's a tough week for those top two teams, even after they play each other Thursday night. Saturday, Irvine's at Long Beach, while Santa Barbara has the Hawaii road trip. And the next Wednesday, Irvine hosting that Fullerton team we just mentioned, Santa Barbara hosting that Northridge team we just mentioned. So
that's very tough for Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Tough week for these teams here in the Big West. David, how about the Colonial, where Hofstra just continues to pick up those W's?
Yeah, Hofstra running away from the league. Like, they have a 3-game lead now that we're through the first half of league play. I just don't see them surrendering that. I think there's a much better chance that they win out than there is of them not finishing first, which means they get to go to North Charleston for the conference tournament because it's a predetermined site, and winning it doesn't mean anything other than that you get to wear the home uniforms.
Yeah, they get to go and play a virtual road game against Charleston in the potential semifinal round of the Colonial, the way standings are right now.
Yeah.
So, congratulations. Yeah, that's what you get for winning the conference.
But a really good Hofstra team, it's one of those deals to where their profile just isn't there as far as the at-large goes. There's just nothing on it. So they'll need to win the tournament, I think, to get in. Unless there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I suppose things could fall their way. But they are in the top 50 of the net. They're broaching the top 50 of the RPI. We've seen in the past where outright first place teams with those kinds of RPIs and I suppose nets get serious looks and even get selected. But they just if you pull up their profile, Chad, there's nothing there.
All right, let's take a quick look at that profile. And Rocco, let me ask you being the bracketologist there, any chance that you look at this Hofstra team seriously, should they just win out this regular season?
I
Nothing
can't.
in the top two. With nothing in
I
the
can't.
top.
They got a big game coming up Saturday at Northeastern.
Right.
So that'll be a road. I think they'll qualify as a quad 2.
Yep.
But and then I think the game at Charleston, which is coming up on
14th.
Valentine's Day. So they have to win all these games. I don't even know if they're good enough to do it. If they are, then certainly their net will improve, their RPI will improve, and the resume will improve. But and the losses aren't horrible. I don't think losing at a schizophrenic Marshall team is like the worst thing you can do. So, I think David's right. I think there is still a glimmer of hope, but they would have to win all these regular season games and then either lose to Charleston at Charleston, which they would actually on the team sheet, I think, list as a road game or at least a semi-road. And then or they can lose to Northeastern in the final, just throwing some scenarios out there, and they would consider that a neutral loss.
Yeah, I believe the rule is they changed it a few years ago, and they're always changing this, so it could be that they've since changed it, that a conference tournament game against a team in their home city, even if it's not their home court, is considered a road game. At least that's how the RPI counted. Well, we're not even using the RPI anymore. But having said that, the tournament is in North Charleston, not Charleston.
The big game this week is that Hofstra Northeastern game on Saturday. One of Hofstra's two toughest remaining games, that game and the Charleston road game. But, John, let me bring you back in here and swing over to CUSA, except I don't think I pulled it up. I don't know what I pulled up right here. But, John, how about Conference USA and those blank standings?
Yeah, those
there are blind resumes, and then there are blind here. So
the curtain. I think the curtain's covering up the standings.
How about this instead, where we've got a complete free-for-all right now in Conference USA in terms of the top of the league?
Yeah, one of the wildest games that was this weekend was Old Dominion blowing, I think it was a 16-point lead at UT San Antonio, which suddenly puts the Roadrunners in a tie for first along with North Texas, who has floated a record themselves, but also coming off of a CBI championship in recent years. So this is a young up-and-coming program, but a program like Old Dominion, is this going to be one of those aberrations, or is this going to kind of define who they are the rest of the way? Because let's not forget they also barely had to squeak by at UTEP leading into that game at San Antonio.
Yeah, UAB had a chance to be in sole possession of first place. They blew a game against Middle Tennessee tonight. It's just been and Dave, you got to remember that the new Conference USA scheduling format, there's 3 pods created for the final 4 games of the regular season. The first 5 teams, the next 5 teams, and the bottom 4.
Right.
We got a huge battle to see who's in which pod at this point.
Yeah, I know. And like when you look at the top pod, you could have 4 or 5 teams going into it that are only separated by 1 game. I mean, it could be pretty climactic.
And one of the things, though, about the pods is if you finish in that first pod, you will be one of the top 5 seeds in the conference tournament, even if you go 0-4 in that pod play and end up with a worse record than teams from the lower pods. So that's one of the strange little quirks about the CUSA scheduling this year. So you could be playing for that 5 seed, with 3 weeks left of the regular season.
Yeah, you can. Which is kind of cool. I mean,
I love it. I wish the Sun Belt did this.
The Sun Belt is going to this format next year.
Yeah, they are. The Sun Belt is.
Okay, good.
Yeah. They're good. It's not this season, but starting next season, the Sun Belt is going to go to a very similar type of pod play as well.
I think any league in this range, from the 8th best league down to the 15th best league that has travel partners, this is the best way to do it for strength of schedule.
Especially if your league's bloated and you just don't have. You can't play a balanced schedule. Like the OVC should do this.
Yes, I agree.
Upcoming schedule in CUSA should be flashing up on the right side of the screen there right now. North Texas at Old Dominion, a big game at San Antonio, Western Kentucky. It's actually a pretty good night coming up to Thursday night here in CUSA across the board. Should be a fun night to watch some CUSA hoops.
Yep.
Not just Western Kentucky, but they also have Marshall as the other travel partner. So a big week for the Roadrunners to see if they can hang into first place.
Coming up next, David, let me head over to you for the Horizon League.
Oh, boy.
One of your favorites, I know.
Oh, yeah, it is. Not this year, but
that top team's pretty good.
Wright State, after dogging them literally since November with how disappointed we were considering everything they had coming back, to be fair to them, they have been dealing with injuries. They've gotten a little bit healthy, and they've actually got themselves up to 500 against D1 competition and playing pretty well right now. Only 2 games back of Northern Kentucky. Now, NKU did beat them in a head-to-head game. I don't think they're going to catch NKU. I just think NKU is going to run away from the league, but are they potential? I mean, again, in a tournament format up in Detroit, they might have they might have what it takes to knock them off. But for the most part, there just isn't a whole lot of storyline here. Detroit kind of had it going, but they've tapered off some. IUPUI continues to be hot and cold. Oakland's hot right now, but they're still 9-12 overall. Overall, still the disappointing league that we said it was a week ago when we featured it.
Yeah, the second NKU Wright State game isn't coming up until February 15th. That might be one to circle, actually, if NKU keeps playing the way they've been playing recently. Yeah. The upcoming schedule in the horizon. Throw it up on the screen there real quick. NKU's games this week, they will be at IUPUI. So I guess, Rocco, we're kind of circling that one at least.
Yeah, IUPUI has played well at home, and they'll really need to keep that going with both NKU and Wright State coming to town. Mm-hmm. One other note for the city of Indianapolis, they are going to be the new host of the Horizon League tournament starting next year.
Okay, so that's official now.
That was announced at the end of last week.
All right. So instead of nobody going to Detroit, we'll have no one going to Indianapolis.
Yeah, no one. Now, the one difference is that it is not at the NBA arena. It will be at IUPUI's campus, or at least that was the plan. And they're keeping the format of the quarterfinals being on campus, which raises the question, why don't they just play the whole damn thing on campus? It was a great format, great how the season led into it, and they managed to get their champion to the tournament most of the time, whereas that's been a struggle recently.
Well, there was also a time in the late 80s and early 90s when they would play what was then the MCC tournament at Market Square Arena, but back then you had teams like Butler, Xavier, and Evansville that were also within easy driving distance of Indy.
Yeah, very different conference back in the old MCC days, though. Rocco, let's pull up the Ivy League here, which finally this weekend is going to go into its regular conference play with back-to-back Friday and Saturday night games the rest of the way here. But how about let's start at the very, very bottom. 8th place, 0-2 in Ivy, 4-0 in the Philadelphia Big Five, the Penn Quakers.
What a bizarre year. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, and I don't know nearly what Matt and Joby know about English soccer, but it reminds me of like a team playing in the Premier League that just doesn't care about that league, but went on and won like the FA Cup or whatever their big cup's called. That's what Penn is doing. They're caring about other competitions than the Ivy League.
Yeah, the difference there, Rocco, is that the FA Cup is an actual cup. Like it's a ticket to not the Champions League, but Europa, which is a ticket. The Big Five, as much as we love it, it isn't real.
Oh, there's gonna be a banner hanging up there in the pleasure for this year. Absolutely.
I mean, with the status of programs like Villanova and Temple, they probably should hang a banner.
Yeah. But Yale and Princeton both 2-0 starts. Yale with winning both the games over Brown, which was impressive given how well Brown had been playing as well. Princeton with a sweep of Penn and
this Yale team is pretty good.
Yeah. Yale's good. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, not Ivy League good. I mean, good. They're under the radar good.
Yeah, and
top 10 good.
They got a tough road test Friday night at Harvard, actually, while Penn and Princeton have the Columbia Cornell road trip. So we got a lot of road games, a lot of big road games coming up this weekend in the Ivy. John, let me go back to you for a very, very powerful and strong conference. I meant the Metro Atlantic.
Yeah, this is a conference that finally saw Rider slip up to Iona on the road by 6 points, but they did bounce back with a close win against Marist over the weekend. But another team like Monmouth, which had quietly crept towards the top of the standings, they did fall back a bit after getting swept on their Buffalo roadie at Canisius and Niagara.
Yeah, and David, we have 3 teams that are at or over 500 against D1, and one of them is Niagara, way down there in the standings.
Yeah.
It's just I'm so sad about what happened to this conference this season.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, it's just not the same.
Rocco, at the end of the day, is it just going to be Iona in the conference tournament again, though? I mean, that seems to be what happens no matter what transpires in the regular season.
Yeah, it could be, and Iona could get a chance to finally get back to Dayton to get revenge for their blown game against BYU a chunk of years ago. Right? Yeah, I could even see Monmouth doing that. Monmouth's played pretty well in conference to the point where I could even see them winning the MAC tournament.
Yeah, Ryder is actually at Monmouth coming up on Saturday. A little Battle of New Jersey there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's Rocco, let me stick with you and go to the good MAC though, as opposed to the bad MAC, the Mid-American Conference. Buffalo technically on the radar, but huge game coming up soon. But what about the rest of this league here?
Yeah, well, a great week for John Stalika's Miami, Ohio Redhawks, who was I featured in our Teams of the Week article this week. They kind of came out of nowhere. They were 9-9, 1-4 at this time last week, and then picked up a big road win at Ball State. And then previously undefeated Bowling Green came to town, and they took care of them as well. So kudos to Miami, Ohio, showing some real strength last week. Maybe a team to keep our eye on the rest of the way. Speaking of that Bowling Green team, our big matchup's coming on Friday finally, where they'll host Buffalo on Friday night.
Right, that's coming up Friday night. David, I didn't ever think that I'd say that Bowling Green is involved in the game of the week in the Mid-American Conference.
They've been on a roll.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, and even though they've been on a roll, but even before they got on the roll, they had moments. And maybe what I mistook for the Johnnies not being very good was just really Bowling Green being better than I thought in games like that. But that one's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, the other games we've got coming up, Bowling Green's next game will be at Western Michigan. I don't see Buffalo up there with any of their games in the next 7 days other than this game at Bowling Green. So
yeah,
keep an eye on that.
And is this Buffalo team the best team in Buffalo in any sport in the last 40 years?
Possibly.
Yeah.
All right. But there's several other very dangerous teams still in this conference with Toledo and Kent State as well to keep an eye on. But let's figure out where we're going next. Salika, you want to take the next conference?
Next conference, I would imagine, would probably be the Northeast.
How about the MEAC?
No, the MEAC is another fun option with both Norfolk State and NC A&T, the beat rolling on.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, so much for the MEAC.
Net rankings. Norfolk State cracks the top 250 this week, and then we've got 10 of the 12 teams below 300. That is atrocious.
Suddenly, Hampton's absence starting to loom a little bit large.
Yeah, let's see here. What do we got coming up here? We got
who cares?
The North Carolina A&T's at Bethune-Cookman and at Florida A&M. They got a little Florida road. That's not bad to go to Florida, given the temperatures in North Carolina this week. That's a nice way to go, I guess. David, how about the Missouri Valley Conference? Let's go to something a little more.
Yeah, let's go to a conference that isn't quite as bad, but is still
but might be close.
Unbelievably disappointing.
Go ahead. Loyola Chicago squeaked out a game tonight over Northern Iowa at home over a really weak Northern.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking for a silver lining, the games in league play have been exciting. Loyola Chicago in first place, but still not nearly as good overall this year as we thought they'd be. They're nowhere near the bubble. You got to wonder if anyone other than the first place team is even going to the NIT out of this league. That's kind of how disappointing it's been. Drake's a good story. I hate that they lost such a key player in Nick. The name's
Nick Norton.
In Nick Norton. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're looking for a story, it's them. But everybody else, I mean, is just. It's just been a rough year, and I don't understand how Southern Illinois is so bad. I don't understand how Illinois State isn't any better. I know they're 6-3, but how did this league get so awful? Are they going to be on the 14 line? Are they even going to get in? Are they even going to get a line any better than that? And if the first place team, which is looking like it's going to be Loyola, wins the conference tournament, is that the only team that makes the NCAA or NIT? I think the answer is yes.
But I think the big disappointment this week is Valpo losing a pair of home games in Drake and Missouri State, where had they just held serve, they would have at least been in a tie with first with the Ramblers. But now they're going to be in a tie for fourth or actually a three-way tie for third with Drake and Missouri State now.
Yeah, quite honestly, I thought that Valpo's record was more of a product of their schedule. I never thought they were really up there. But Drake had gotten hot, though, Rocco, until tonight when they lose to the newest, hottest team. How about Illinois State?
Yeah, well, the Illinois State's had the talent, and they're finally starting to realize that potential. I think even in the loss to to Loyola Chicago was down to the wire on the road. So they I think will have staying power, but they will probably lose a game or two down the stretch that we don't expect them to. On Valparaiso, just quickly, they haven't been playing recently without star player Nick Fazekas, the Providence transfer. He's been out, and they also have another starter out. So pretty short-handed club. In fact, Rick Smith's son, Derek Smith's, their star center, also missed one of those games. So they've got really bitten by the injury bug, but they definitely could come back into the picture once they get a healthy lineup.
Watch a huge game coming up Saturday, too. Loyola Chicago is at Illinois State. I'm definitely going to be circling that game to the extent we're circling anything left in the conference. And then Loyola hosts Drake on Tuesday, so big week for the Ramblers, actually.
Yeah.
Rocco, let me stick with you and move over to the Northeast Conference, one of our favorite leagues here at Hoops HD, where Robert Morris is starting to actually pull out a lead in the conference.
Robert Morris cannot be stopped lately. They played the teams that were the highest, I think, in terms of metric strength. That would be Wagner and Sacred Heart last week. Maybe Sacred Heart wasn't, but Wagner certainly was, and they beat them both. So they passed two more important tests, and now I think the rest of the league is a jumbled mess. There it is.
There it is. Looks like Central Connecticut and Mount St. Mary's right now would be the two teams not to make the conference tournament. Huge battle, though, for the other two home first-round games at least, although SFBK right there also.
We had a situation in the Big East where you've got like 8 teams that were within a half game of each other, but I don't know if any other conferences where you have a 6-way tie for third, though, so certainly pretty impressive by the NEC.
Yeah, we used to always see that in the Big South, but now it's the NEC's getting there. Should be a fun stretch drive, though. David, the upcoming schedule of the Northeast Conference coming up on the right side of the screen there. What, if anything, are you circling here?
Well, I mean, always you just kind of have to keep an eye on Robert Morris at this point. They got the SFPA team at home this week. But, yeah, other than that one, Chad, I always circle all of them.
Pretty much. I mean, this is still my conference where you can just turn any of those 10 games on the screen on it, and it's just fun to watch.
Right.
And you seem to always get close games in this league.
You do, and we've got 5 tomorrow night. It's John, distracting because there's other important games, and I'm watching these.
John, let's go back to the Ohio Valley Conference, which saw last Thursday night Belmont go to Murray, pick up the huge road win, and reassert themselves back into the conference battle. Also picked up a real nice win over the weekend at Austin Peay, who's probably the 4th best team in the conference.
That was also critical after Belmont ended up getting swept by Jacksonville State. So if we end up in a possible 3-way tie involving Murray, Jacksonville, and Belmont, at least gets them closer to 500 within the pack. But that win against Murray State going to pay huge dividends because you could say there's a bit of a chance Belmont might get at large, but I don't see how they're going to be able to do that without somehow getting at least an at-large regular season title.
Yeah, I think you're right. They have to finish tied for first. David, Jacksonville State should be 8-0 in the conference right now, except they went and lost a head-scratcher at Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, and they actually one of the things about Jack State that I've noticed is that they don't really handle pressure that well. Mm-hmm. So when they do play Murray State, it might be interesting. Belmont, not a pressure team, not an athletic team. They're very big on controlling the tempo and executing out of the half court. That plays more to Jack State's strengths than than it will when they play Murray State. Murray State might run Jack State over, and that would at least move Belmont up one more spot. But
that's tomorrow night's game, Murray at
Yeah.
Jack State, by the way. Yes.
yeah, and that one should be. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that one. This is a really good Murray State team that, again, as athletic as they are, they don't have much else in their toolbox. Now, they don't really need much else, but Belmont just controlled that whole game. It was one of the more impressive showings I've seen in a while. It was similar to some of the Lipscomb games where they just went into a hostile environment, got control of the game. Every time Murray wanted to try and make a run at it, Belmont came up with a big play. I know Murray had to deal with a critical injury, but a really impressive showing by Belmont, and they might not lose to anybody the rest of the year. They already got the 2 Jack State games out of the way. They're running downhill, and they might win out.
They should.
Yeah.
They should win out. I think their toughest game left is, number 220 Eastern Kentucky, because they only played Murray once. And I'm still planning to be there tomorrow for the Murray State Jack State game, but unfortunately was unable to get credentialed because they're expecting over 50 NBA scouts there, because Morant is in the running for the number 1 pick. And with Jacksonville, Alabama only being an hour and 20 minutes from where the Super Bowl is located, there is a overload of media heading to Jacksonville, Alabama tomorrow, which is actually a pretty cool reason not to get a credential. So it should be a fun game tomorrow night. Keep your eye on it.
Yeah, that should be a fun one. Also, big week coming up for Austin Peay. Like I mentioned, probably the 4th best team in this conference. They get the trip to Jacksonville State after Jacksonville State just hosted Murray, so maybe they can catch Jacksonville State with a little bit of a hangover should they get that win.
Yeah. Interesting point here, just real quick before we move on. This tournament is a ladder format, so as good as Jack State, Murray, and Belmont are, one of them is going to have to win a game in the quarterfinals to get to the semis, whereas the other 2 will not.
Yeah, the 2
You also have to watch out for a team like Tennessee Tech, who's just trying to qualify for the tournament, period. But now they would have the 8th and final spot at 3 and 5.
Yeah, long way to go. So.
Yeah, and real quick, let's just not forget about Austin Peay. They had a 14-point second-half lead on Belmont that, if not for a huge rally by Belmont, they would have knocked them off on Saturday.
Yeah. Fun fact by Eastern Kentucky, home high school basketball tournament on their campus had to play at an NAIA school. Pretty funny. Anyway, let's keep going.
Yeah. They played at Georgetown, but not the Georgetown that you and I know.
Right.
The Patriot League is up next, where Bucknell and Lehigh are tied, at least in the loss column. Army's still kind of just very quietly, though, Rocco, hanging around there. Did suffer the loss to Colgate to knock them out of that first-place tie, though.
Yeah. It's kind of fun to pull for Army. I mean, there's probably been a time. Of course, they've made the tournament and did great things in the very early years, but I'm just thinking in my lifetime if they've made it or not.
No, Army has never made the NCAA tournament, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I take all that back.
They're one of the 4.
Coach K. I think Coach K.
Never made the tournament, but we're invited to one.
Yeah. One of the neat facts about Army basketball, back when Bob Knight was the head coach there, they actually received an invite to the NCAA tournament, turned it down to go play the NIT.
Good call.
And they had a point guard by the name of Mike Krzyzewski on that team too, by the way.
Right. So I knew they had good teams then. I just assumed they had gone. Thank you for correcting me. Lehigh and Army getting after each other on Saturday, by the way. But Bucknell, they were stunned by that American team, and American won again tonight. So I'm kind of curious what's changed in the blood there in Washington D.C. Maybe the Eagles are a team to watch out for.
Yeah, that they've got their American is hosting Holy Cross, and then at Navy. Bucknell did pick up a win at Navy, I believe, tonight. But you mentioned the big game coming up this weekend. Let's keep things rolling. David, let me go to you next. And let's head over to your favorite conference. You like to discuss it every week. Of course, we're talking about the Southland Conference.
This is my favorite conference?
Yeah, you always say that Conference USA is full of Southland teams. You always say that.
Oh, well, I use that as a comparison to bad teams. Well, again, Abilene Christian, 2 games back, I don't think they're going to catch Sam Houston. Like, they're just caught fire, maybe in the conference tournament. New Orleans, it seems like New Orleans I mean, I know that the Southland's quiet all the way around, but this is the third or fourth year in a row that they've quietly played their way toward the top of the standings. But other than that, I think Sam Houston is really in the driver's seat. Abilene Christian, it would be a great story if they could win the conference tournament, being such a new transitional team. But I just don't see it happening. And oh God, does it get this league's pretty rough.
Well, and one thing, there's a lot of closeness in the standings here. This league does use the ladder format as well, with only top eight teams qualifying. So, Rocco, we could be in for a real fun stretch drive of the Southland Conference, at least.
Yeah, it will be a tight race for the 8 seed. It'd be fun to see who goes, but I think Sam Houston's been proving that they're the best team in the league. So, you can't overlook Stephen F. Austin because they're well coached and they'll get a ton of fans at the tournament. So I look for one of those two to come out of this.
Right, and one of the great rivalries in the Southland in recent years has been the SFA Sam Houston State game, and they are playing on Saturday, so another game to circle.
Yeah, I am watching that one.
And I think the other stakes to keep in mind would be teams like SFA and also Texas A&M Corpus Christi trying to at least get into the top 4, so you at least get one bye in the ladder format.
Yeah. All right, John, let me stick with you. I know I gave you the MEAC earlier, so I'm going to follow that up by giving you the SWAC as well. So congratulations.
Well, that's only fair because I did highlight Prairie View beating Arkansas Pine Bluff for the game of the night on Monday. So
what the hell is happening to Texas Southern? Anyway, go ahead, John.
Well, Prairie View, actually, I think they're one of, 15 teams that are still unbeaten in conference play. So this wasn't just a one-trick pony beating Texas Southern and still have a full game lead on Alabama State. But what's funny is those two teams are at least 2 to 3 games ahead of the rest of the pack here.
Yeah, and how about this Alabama State team after failing to win a D1 game in non-conference play, 6-1 now in SWAC play.
Yeah,
at least Prairie View picked up one D1 win in non-conference play.
Yeah,
but yeah, you're right. Texas Southern, David, has fallen off the map, it seems like, at this point. And we've got, in terms of upcoming games, I believe that Alabama State Prairie View game is coming up on Monday night. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yep.
And, I mean, Monday, as we did last year, we've started to watch the MEAC and SWAC on Mondays now. I'm sure it'll be the same this year. After the Hoops HD report, we'll be watching the SWAC on the call. So,
Rocco, Summit League, where South Dakota State still continuing to roll through the conference after just the one early loss.
Yes, and Mike Dahm is starting to put up some Mike Dahm godly numbers. I believe last week he had a combined, I think the first game he went for 33, the second game he went for 30, and then he also added 18 boards and 15 boards respectively. So there's, they're really starting to, it looks like, hit their stride. They're blowing teams out, kind of more of what we expected earlier in the year, which is good to see. Also, a surprising result last week, I thought, was Western Illinois winning at South Dakota. That kind of came out of nowhere for me. But, yeah, South Dakota State's got total control of the league. And with the conference tournament in the location that it is, I really
Sioux Falls, yeah.
I'd be stunned if anybody else wins this conference tournament.
I agree. I mean, the biggest challenge might be if they have to play South Dakota in an early round of the tournament. But this week, South Dakota State has the road trip, though. Tough road trip at Oral Roberts at Denver. A lot of miles they're going to be locking at least.
Yeah, maybe Oral Roberts will give them a game, but Denver's looking terrible.
Yeah. David, how about the Sun Belt Conference?
yeah.
Okay, or not.
Or not, yeah. Well, I still think it's a 2-horse race, as well as Georgia Southern has played at times, and I still think Louisiana can play well. It's still a Texas State, Georgia State 2-horse race, in my opinion. And while I was more impressive with Georgia State out of conference and even through most of the first half of league play, for Texas State to go there and beat them, even though that they have 2 losses, you kind of got to like them a little bit better.
Well, it was a really weird week, though. Texas State wins at Georgia State, while Georgia Southern loses at home to Arlington, and then on Saturday, Georgia Southern beats Texas State, and Georgia State bounces back. So
kind of nutty.
And you have in the loss column, you have top 7 teams all within a game of each other there.
Yeah. So a lot of parity, but I still think I was really impressed with the win I mean, I don't know if they just wore themselves out or what, but not only did they go to Georgia State and win, they looked really good doing it if you watch the game.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, these Texas State guys are for real. And then I didn't see hardly any of it on Saturday, but I did notice that they lost. But, yeah, like you kind of said, a weird week. I still think those are the two best teams. Georgia Southern's good, but I don't think they're as good as the top two, even though they just beat Texas State.
And Rocco, you would start to sell me on this Louisiana Monroe team with a couple of heartbreaking losses, but then on Saturday they laid a complete egg at home against South Alabama.
They did, yeah. South Alabama is a team that, first-year coach Richie Riley, I like him a lot. But they're a developing, forming team. Could be dangerous by the end of the year. We'll see. There's things to like about, I think, the top 7 here and South Alabama. I think Georgia Southern's a much more dangerous home team. They haven't done a lot on the road. But besides that, the UT Arlington turnaround under first-year coach Chris Ogden has been impressive the last couple of weeks. I think we all know about Texas State and Georgia State after those 2 battles. Lafayette is finally starting to pick up their pace, and Grant, I think, is the best player in the conference. So, I mean, this is going to be a real intriguing tournament.
Right. And
one thing
this has moved to Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention, John, though, that this conference also is moving to a ladder format this year for the tournament, so nothing to keep an eye on. But go ahead, John.
That's big.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chad is going to chastise me online for not highlighting UNC Asheville as a possible under-the-radar game of the day. How did I miss the pillow fight between Little Rock and hot Appalachian State?
Oh, congratulations, App State pick up a big road win at Little Rock.
Getting off the schneid.
Moving on. We've got coming up tomorrow night. We've got a couple games. Arlington, Texas State, and Georgia Southern. Georgia State are the 2 games to circle, I think, for this weekend, though. But there should be a couple of good games here.
Yeah,
but
this conference has been fun to watch. I wish it was campus sites.
Rocco, the Western Athletic Conference, our last conference for the night. New Mexico State, Grand Canyon, Bakersfield, all in the tie in the loss column there.
Right, and I think the big surprise is Bakersfield, but they've been able to capitalize on the softer side of the schedule and win all their games except for the one in Las Cruces. And now we really find out if they're for real when their next 2 games are going to be Grand Canyon and New Mexico State back-to-back. This Saturday and next Thursday, but they get them both at home, and there's a good chance they can possibly win on their home court there in either game. They did pick up a big win last week at Cal Baptist. I think Cal Baptist is shown that they're a pretty tough opponent, especially in Riverside. They actually have a transfer from Washington State this year that was able to become immediately eligible. He's averaging over 20 a game, and Bakersfield did a good job of overcoming that challenge. So, yeah, I'm intrigued. Utah Valley is not a bad team either, and I think they could still make noise towards the end of the year.
Right, and while they've been unbelievably disappointing in conference play so far, Seattle, I still think, could turn things around, at least be a challenge at the conference tournament, be tough out of the conference tournament. And then you've got UTRGV and Chicago State in the league as well.
They're in the league as well. Let's not forget that they're in the league. Just a quick nugget on Seattle. After they started 0-6 in the league, they had a closed locker room meeting after that game, and nobody came out of the locker room for 2 hours. So Coach Hayford's really putting in the work, trying to turn this thing around.
Yeah, and then they turn around. They got the win at Chicago State, but they lost. I did want to know.
I'm interested to see where it goes.
Actually, I said, and UTRGV. Actually, Rio Grande had a real shot to beat New Mexico State over the weekend, and Mexico State pulled out a 2-point really close win. So.
Yeah, you can't help but notice that New Mexico State has had to sweat out some games. I mean, they've won 5 in a row, but they needed a last-second shot to beat Grand Canyon. That's Grand Canyon's only loss. They needed to pull it out against UTVRG. Didn't they need to come from behind to beat Bakersfield?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
and they lost to Baptist. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and they lost at Baptist. Now, I mean, they've been winning, and as we start to get into the second half of conference play, how much longer can they keep that up?
I'll tell you what. That finishes all of our under the radar conferences. John, let me go to you. I'm going to pull up our under the radar top 10 and get your thoughts on some of these teams. Let's start with some of the honorable mentions this week. And this was all four of us voted on these. And John, just missing the field: Liberty, Northern Kentucky, UC Irvine, Texas State, and how about those Prairie View A&M Panthers?
Somebody voted for Prairie View.
Well, the Panthers certainly deserve the mention, staying undefeated in the SWAC. And NKU was another team that was kind of slumbering in their win against Milwaukee, but the Panthers woke up the sleeping giant, and NKU just went to town for the second half of that one this weekend.
The teams that actually did make the top 10, we'll reveal them one time. You'll start. Number 10 was New Mexico State, who we just mentioned in the WAC there. Coming in at number 9, East Tennessee State out of the SoCon. That may show you that we've got a lot more SoCon to go still in this.
Ooh, yeah. I didn't even vote for them.
Number 8, Vermont, on the strength of that win at Stony Brook.
That's a good Vermont team.
And right above them, Yale. We're getting
Yale,
some really good teams.
Yeah. I'm glad to see them in there.
I mean, I think we're at 7th and 8th place here. We got teams that can be very dangerous in the NCAA tournament. In the top 6, even more so. Murray State, who we mentioned in the OVC, right on top of them, their OVC. They're actually ahead of Belmont in the standings, behind them in our list here. On the strength of the head-to-head win by Belmont. Number 4, UNC Greensboro.
That is high, yeah.
Now finally our top 3 here. We got coming at number 3, we've got Hofstra. Number 2, shouldn't be much of a surprise.
I guess the order between Wofford and Lipscomb.
Lipscomb, and number 1. It's a big suspense here. In fact, we're even going to need a little drum roll.
Andy.
And it is
Andy. It's Andy.
No, it's the Wofford Terriers.
Oh, it's Wofford. Okay.
All right. On that note, we already had Andy at the top of the show, David. Come on.
Yeah.
Pull this down here. Run through each of you for any of their final thoughts for the evening. John, let you start things off.
I'm going to go back to Vermont's win over the weekend against Stony Brook. This was the first time since 1977 in NCAA Division I play that 3 brothers actually started for Vermont. That would be Robin, Ernie, and Everett Duncan. And as we mentioned the last time this had happened, Villanova had beaten Colgate back in February of 1977.
I remember that game, don't you?
No.
That's a neat stat, though. Rocco.
Yeah, so, UNC Wilmington has certainly had their more downs than ups this year, but there is a great season happening for senior Devontae Kaycock. He's been unstoppable as an individual, put up 22 and 16 in a victory over William and Mary last week, and followed that up with a 20-point, 19-rebound effort in a loss against Elon. He's going to be potentially the CAA. The player from Hofstra is obviously having a big year as well, but there's a potential for the CAA's Player of the Year to come from an 8th or 9th place team, which would be an interesting story to follow.
All right, David?
We just had the under the radar top 10, and everybody from about 8 or 7 all the way up to 1 looks to be really dangerous, and it's deja vu. Normally by the end of January, we always feel this way, and the problem is just the opportunity. The situation they're in is that for most of them, and just about all of them, the rest of the way their resume isn't going to get any better. The best they can do is to hope that they don't trip over the rug and end up busting themselves in the teeth and knocking themselves out. And as good as they are, it's disappointing that sometimes the best teams and the ones with the best chances of winning in the NCAA tournament aren't even able to get there because they need the automatic bid to get in. And I would just plead with the committee, especially as weak as the bubble is now, to consider not just what's on a team's profile as far as top 50 wins, top 100 wins, but how difficult was it to win some of the games that they won? Winning at Liberty's not easy. No one's done it, even though Liberty's not a top 50 team. Lipscomb went in there and didn't just win, but blew them out. Winning at TCU isn't easy. No one's done it, and they're in a power conference. Lipscomb did it. It's not easy to win at Murray State. No one's done it. Belmont did it. It's not easy to win at Lipscomb. No one's done it except Belmont. So sometimes to get a full, an idea of how good a team actually is, You got to look at how hard it is to win the games that they're winning, and to do that effectively, I think you have to look at more than just who the opponent is. And in recent years, I don't think the committee's been doing that, at least not as much as I wish they would. And the second thing, like every year, when you look at the 12 and the 13 line, and you look at the teams that are inside the bubble but in the bottom half of the bracket, like roughly 9, 10, and 11, in many cases, I would pick the 12 and the 13 seeds to beat the 9, 10, and 11 seeds. And I think it's going to be that way again, especially if these 7 are all able to make it into the dance via the automatic bid.
Yeah, David, I got to give you credit that you've been saying this for years. I mean, you're right. Liberty has not lost any home games other than the Lipscomb game. They've done a great job beating North Florida, Jacksonville, North Alabama, South Carolina State, Savannah State, Maine Fort Kent, Trevecca Nazarene, and Kentucky Christian at home. What a powerful home resume.
Yeah. Shut up, Chen.
On that note, though, I do want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Chad Sherwood, joined by David Griggs, Rocco Miller from Bracketeer.org, John Salika. This has been our Under the Radar podcast. We're back tomorrow night with a Believe It Bracket Rundown show. Lots of more content. And on that note, have a great evening, everybody, and we'll talk to you again real soon.